Welcome to another video. Today I'm discussing anxiety and particularly anxiety through a philosophical lens. I went into shame in the previous video and it seemed to resonate quite well. And I think anxiety is very much so related to shame and guilt, as we're going to see in this video. Um, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. It's going to be a bit of a different setup yet again. I'm just going to read basically an essay or a text, at least, that I've written. Um, just let me know what you think of this setup. But yeah, I've been reading about anxiety as of late because anxiety plays a major part in procrastination. And I'm a procrastination coach for INTPs. And there are other causes of procrastination or inaction, avoidance, time wasting, not fulfilling your potential, whatever term or phrase you want to apply, but I'm just going to call it procrastination. Um, When it comes to procrastination, I think anxiety might be both the broadest and the deepest cause, in that it causes the most procrastination out of all the different causes. Like, procrastination can also be caused from distractions or simply using analysis as a way of procrastinating instead of acting. But procrastination via anxiety seems to happen the most, and procrastination via anxiety is also in a way the most difficult to solve, and we'll get into why that is and why anxiety can be so inhibiting or difficult to push through. So currently I'm reading a book called The Meaning of Anxiety by Rollo May, which some people have called a definitive work when it comes to anxiety, and I can highly recommend it. If you're struggling with anxiety in some way, shape, or form, go and read it. I'm trying to summarize the most important points from the philosophical element of the book in this video, but still a great book to just read. Now, when I'm talking of anxiety, I'm speaking not of neurotic anxiety or like a diagnosable anxiety, just general feeling is what I'm discussing that so many INTPs struggle with, and we'll get into why that is throughout this video. Now, anxiety can be defined in many ways and also interpreted via many lenses. The most surface level explanation I can give is that anxiety is the feeling you get when expecting a negative outcome. There are, of course, many things in life in which you are not certain of what's going to happen. So you might ask yourself, if I say this in a meeting at work or in the classroom or in whatever environment, how will people respond? You don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know if that outcome or the consequences of your actions will be positive or negative, but there is at least a chance that it will be negative. And anxiety is a feeling you get when expecting, to whatever degree, a negative outcome. You might ask yourself, if I fill in this answer, how will my teacher grade me? If I give this presentation, how will my coworkers judge me? Or if I start this business, how will it go? And you simply don't know. Now, if you are absolutely certain of a negative outcome, there's little anxiety. In the context of surviving in nature, this scenario of being absolutely certain of a negative outcome would elicit fear. And fear is different from anxiety because fear actually gets us to take action, whilst anxiety more so leads to paralysis. Now, in the context of the modern world, there's really no incentive in a scenario where you're absolutely certain of a negative outcome to even try getting to the positive outcome that could also happen, because you believe there's basically zero chance of it happening. And so that option is basically forgotten about. But in a lot of cases, we do see a chance of a positive outcome. And as we'll see later in the video, that is a prerequisite for anxiety. So anxiety occurs when there is a possibility of a bad and a good outcome. And so anxiety then is a spectrum with dread on one hand and hope on the other. And you basically have like an intensity of one or the other. So let's say when you feel a lot of anxiety, you're likely feeling more dread than you are feeling hope. You are feeling more expectancy of a negative outcome than of a positive outcome. So you could almost see it as like a percentage, like you feel 80% dread, 20% hope, and so your anxiety is quite intense. Now, anxiety in prehistoric times versus in modern times takes place at different rates or intensity. In prehistoric times, anxiety might have occurred when, for example, you're in a forest and you spot a bear, and you're not sure if the best approach is to run, or to climb a tree, or to stand your ground. Each option brings anxiety because you're not sure of the outcome. I would imagine that typically your approach would be to wait to see what the bear does, as it might simply walk away. But in this scenario, your fight or flight mechanism takes over and you make a choice basically at some point, which is very different from the anxiety we face in modern times. Because in modern times, our threats usually don't just walk off, they are more permanent in nature. So, for people in general, or INTP specifically, it might be things like paying bills, potentially losing your partner or significant other or whatever, maintaining your health, overcoming an illness, climate change, whatever, that causes your anxiety. On top of that, anxiety has increased as the amount of information we're exposed to increases. I believe the average human being consumes about 174 newspapers worth of information every single day. But at the same time, our knowledge, or wisdom at least, decreases, at least relatively to the levels of information that we have access to. And the main philosopher that we'll be looking at today puts it in the following way. Quote, the reason for the contemporary generation's anxiety and restlessness is this, that in one direction, truth increases in extent, in mass, partly also in abstract clarity, whereas certitude steadily decreases, unquote. Take environmental issues, for example. They are not just permanent, which leads to the anxiety lasting in you for longer, but a hunter gatherer 20,000 years ago, or even a simple villager in medieval Europe, would not ever come into contact with the information of what's going on at that exact moment in other parts of the world, or have access to data on deforestation, for example. So you can see how this modern world experiences a lot more anxiety. And in fact, anxiety only has seemed to be like a serious issue since the 17 or 1800s. Now, INTPs have to deal with this even more so as they are curious, analytical people that enjoy learning. They enjoy this feeling of the joy of insight and understanding the world around them better. In other words, you love learning even more so, and you might have access to even more information on a daily basis than other types. Our NE auxiliary function comes into play as well, as it likes to explore options and ask what if all day. So if information in and of itself is like a torch, and having access to more information on top of enjoying the process of acquiring new information means increasing the intensity of the torch, thus increasing how much of the woods you're in you can see. More information leads to seeing even more options or pathways, right? I haven't had any mathematical thought in almost a decade. Um, but it's just like an exponential function, right? As you increase um, your view, you can go left and right of either tree, let's say. As you increase your uh, knowledge or information, it's like a torch increasing how far into the woods you can see, which means you see more trees. And if you can go left and right of every single tree, then it grows exponentially. Or it can be like chess, for example, right? Like once a single move has been made, so many different things can happen. Um, I'm not sure what I meant by this, to be honest, but whatever. Now, if you ask an ITP about where the world is headed over the next few decades, and they answer in a serious manner, in a non-joking manner, they'll likely tell you that they don't know, right? Because most INTPs, as a result of their MBTI-based tendencies, will have gone through the process of gaining knowledge to the point of realizing they know nothing. At least I feel that way. When you continue learning about things, you'll often just realize that you don't understand things very well. You understand things quickly, but there is so much to understand that in a relative manner, you don't really understand all that's going on in the world. And so it's basically impossible to guess where the world will be at 10 years from now. Now, I also believe that quite a lot of INTPs seem to think that because of their analytical, rational, intellectual way of thinking, they're not prone to emotional whims or making decisions based on feeling. However, as Blaise Pascal said, who might have been an INTP, the heart has reasons which the reason knows not of. In fact, there's plenty of INTP experiences, at least sort of stereotypical or typical ones, throughout childhood and early adult life that will shape you and bring this psychological baggage with it that you will need to overcome and that you will need to be aware of in order to overcome. As Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So, who then is that main philosopher that is discussed in the book, The Meaning of Anxiety by Rollo May? And the main philosopher we'll be looking at today. And what was his outlook on anxiety? That man is Søren Kierkegaard, who wrote a book called The Concept of Dread or The Concept of Anxiety. I haven't read that book yet. I'm just depending on Rollo May's book, and it's discussing a mentioning of Kierkegaard's book. But I mentioned earlier in the video that the most surface level explanation of anxiety I can give is that anxiety is the feeling you get when expecting a negative outcome. It is now that we turn to Kierkegaard to shape that definition, to sharpen that definition. Quote, anxiety is a desire for what one dreads, a sympathetic antipathy. Anxiety is an alien power which lays hold of an individual, and yet one cannot tear oneself away, nor has a will to do so, for one fears, but what one fears, one desires. Anxiety then makes the individual impotent. So, in order to clarify that, I want to reverse it first. Kierkegaard says anxiety is a desire for what one dreads. But I think anxiety is more clearly explained by noting that anxiety is a dreading of what one desires. Simple example. You want to say something, right? You have a desire to say something in whatever context. You're thinking that if other people interpret what you're saying well, those people will benefit of what you have to share. They might also respect you more. It might bring you opportunities as a result of that, etc. However, you don't say it, you inhibit yourself. Why? Well, the answer is anxiety. You dread, for example, all of those eyes in the meeting room on you when you say something. You dread getting told it doesn't make sense. You dread a negative outcome. You dread losing respect. So there's all of this calculation going on inside of you, inside of your head. And that's why sometimes in such a context, you will say something and sometimes you won't. So your acting, your actions, your behavior will bring into reality an event that you desire but also dread. And that leads to you experiencing anxiety. Right, so now we can flip back to the original line and make more sense of it. Anxiety is a desire for what one dreads. So your acting actions, your behavior will bring into reality an event that you both desire and dread. Because you see it going well and you see it going badly, and you're not certain which of those outcomes will occur. Anxiety then makes the individual impotent. So I think there are two main elements to dreading the outcome of a certain action you take. First is the immediate consequences, and second is the long-term consequences. For example, when you're presenting your graduation thesis, that can bring anxiety from the thought of perhaps experiencing social rejection throughout the presentation itself, but also the long-term consequences, being either failing and having to spend more time, months again, improving your thesis, which you might not want to do until you pass and graduate, which you'd likely dread, or passing and then, for example, you dreading your parents forcing you or pressuring you to immediately get like an office job, which you might also dread. So we've been focusing mostly on the negative element of anxiety so far, right? That is to say, we've highlighted that a fundamental ingredient of anxiety is dread. which is the expectation of a negative outcome. However, if there was only dread, we would just experience dread. Anxiety, however, is dread combined with hope. So, what's that all about? Here's a passage from the book. Quote, Kierkegaard held that anxiety is always to be understood as oriented towards freedom. Unquote. Freedom is the goal of personality development. Psychologically speaking, quote, the good is freedom. Unquote. Kierkegaard defines freedom as possibility. Quote, the distinctive characteristic of the human being, in contrast to the merely vegetative or the merely animal, lies in the range of human possibility and in our capacity for self awareness of possibility. Kierkegaard sees man as the creature who is continually beckoned by possibility, who conceives of possibility, visualizes it, and by creative activity carries it into actuality, or can carry it into actuality. Now, this capacity for freedom brings with it anxiety. Anxiety is the state of the human being, says Kierkegaard, when he confronts his freedom. Indeed, he describes anxiety as, quote, the possibility of freedom, unquote. Whenever possibility is visualized by an individual, anxiety is potentially present in the same experience. So basically, anxiety revolves around freedom. As INTPs, freedom is so important. I think any conscious, sentient human being will crave freedom in whatever way and strive for it and work for it. But it definitely applies very strongly to INTPs. There's a quote from personalityjunkie.com, which is by AJ Drenth, who is an INTP himself, who says, the INTP personality type is the most independent and philosophical of the 16 types. INTPs have a deep need for personal autonomy, and freedom of thought. And you see this in other types as well, but it's usually for INTPs and other types our dominant function that we want to have the most freedom in. So for us, that's TI, right? Introvert thinking or analysis. But for INTPs, it's not just this TI freedom that we seek, it's also any being our auxiliary function. And any loves possibility, it sees and wants to explore possibilities. And those two together really bring a craving of freedom, freedom of thought, freedom of analysis, freedom of exploring, contemplating in INTPs. Now, possibilities or opportunities can be made real, they can be actualized, but it is the anxiety that is the intermediate determinant. Right? Overcome your anxiety and you bring things into reality. You create things, etc. But succumb to your anxiety and nothing happens. Well, it's actually not true that nothing happens. Entropy happens. Danko, who is a writer, says, if you understand entropy, you understand that by doing nothing, you don't stay the same. You slowly, instead, fall into chaos like a room you don't clean that only gets dirtier. So TI is analysis, it breaks things down. That in and of itself brings many opportunities or pathways into your conscious awareness. Any that likes to explore, it asks what if over and over again, thus bringing even more possibilities into your awareness. Now, if you get stuck in this TI-SI loop for not too long, it can help you gain even more insight into the realm you're analyzing and exploring by ruminating and contemplating. If you get stuck in it too long though, you're just gonna ruminate over knowledge that you basically already possess without bringing it into reality to sort of fact check it or without adding new information to your understanding. And based on our understanding of anxiety so far, more possibilities, like I just mentioned, mean more anxiety. And this is where a lot of INTPs can get stuck. But there's yet another element to anxiety, and not necessarily an INTP specific one, but one that affects us as INTPs nonetheless. And it has less to do with the possibilities we see out there for whatever we're working on or thinking about, and more to do with what goes on inside of us. Another quote from the book or a passage. Now, creating, actualizing one's possibilities always involves destructive as well as constructive aspects. It always involves destroying the status quo, destroying old patterns within oneself, progressively destroying what one has clung to from childhood on, and creating new and original forms and ways of living. Every experience of creativity has its potentiality of aggression or denial towards other people or other persons in one's environment, or toward established patterns within one's self. To put the matter figuratively, in every experience of creativity, something in the past is killed, so that something in the present, something new in the present may be born. Unfortunately, this phenomenon only makes it more difficult to take action, right? A part of us doesn't want us to take action, not just because of the external consequences or responsibilities that might follow from your actions, but because we have to let go of patterns and habits and beliefs and ways of thinking that we have used and that have served us in the past, which means to let go of the things that make our comfort zone, that make our comfort zone comfortable, familiar, certain, right? Means to destroy what we have clung to from childhood on. Here's a quote from The Mountain Is You by Brianna Weiss. Self-sabotage comes from what's unfamiliar. Human beings experience a natural resistance to the unknown because it is essentially the ultimate loss of control. This is true even if what's unknown is benevolent or even beneficial to us. If you're an INTP or an introvert in general, you're likely introspective and reflective enough to realize that you could be more or could do more than you're doing or being now. So already there is this feeling of guilt in INTPs. Quote, if you do not do this, you are refusing to grow, refusing to avail yourself of possibilities. You are shirking your responsibility to yourself. Hence, refusal to actualize one's possibilities brings guilt towards oneself. But creating also means destroying the status quo of one's environment, breaking the old forms. Hence, for Kierkegaard, guilt feeling is always a concomitant of anxiety. Both are aspects of experiencing and actualizing possibility. The more creative the person, he held, the more anxiety and guilt are potentially present. The greater the genius, writes Kierkegaard, the more profoundly he discovers guilt. And this is where the element of shame and guilt from the previous video come in. In the case of anxiety, you feel guilty or you experience guilt for both wanting to change. So you feel guilty for wanting to change, but you also feel guilty at the thought of not having changed yet. There's a part of you feeling bad about yourself for wanting to change because you feel in a certain way that you should be loyal to your old patterns, but at the same time you feel guilty for not letting go of the past and creating something new. That is where I want to end the video basically. If you're interested more in guilt and shame, check out the previous video if you haven't yet. If you would like to see another video of me explaining anxiety, just drop a comment or a like or whatever, and then I will be sure to make that. Because in the meaning of anxiety, there is more than a philosophical interpretation of anxiety. There's also a biological, psychological, cultural one, uh, which I think are also very interesting. And regardless of if you want more explanation of what anxiety is, I am going to make a video in the nearby future on how to overcome anxiety as an INTP. But maybe some more understanding would be helpful. So let me know if you want that. Now, if you are looking to learn more about what it's like to be an INTP and procrastination, then you can click the link in the description to join my free INTP community. I'll show you briefly what it looks like. Um, this is it. You can just ask each other questions, and there is a way to speak to me just by chatting. And there's also Classroom, which is in development, but there are going to be trainings here on cognitive functions and things like that, on procrastination, more information. And again, this is just a way to connect. Um, if you are serious and really committed to overcoming your procrastination and you want to finally become consistently productive in the upcoming year, there's also a link to do a free procrastination audit with me so that you're crystal clear on what's holding you back and what you can do about it completely for free. And I won't be selling you anything in that call either. Although that last point might be different if you're watching this video in the future. I don't know, but an audit is always free and just a way to figure out what causes your procrastination. Is it distraction? Is it anxiety? Or is it over analyzing and not having a healthy productivity workflow? Basically, it's usually one of those three. And we can also get into, if you're anxious, what is it exactly? Because we've seen in this video, there's multiple, merely in the philosophical realm, multiple causes of anxiety. It's having to let go of the past. It's stepping into the future. It's many different things. Um, so I'd love to talk to you about that, talk with you about that, and figure out what's holding you back from creating the things that you could create as an INTP. And you would help me out a lot because I am trying to make um, all of the procrastination solutions for INTPs that I have in my head better and actually turn that into something that can help many people. Um, and that requires making my ideas the best they can be. So, in other words, I would love to actually be able to implement alongside of people, alongside of ITPs who resonate with what I'm saying, these solutions, and working with people to continue developing a program or a product or a could become a book or an ebook or whatever it is that really is life changing and that can allow hundreds or thousands or more ITPs to create the things they are capable of creating if only they overcome their procrastination and their resistance. Also, if you just want to talk to me and you're interested in talking about MBTI and whatever, then I'll also put a third link in the description to just book a networking call with me, which is a bit shorter than a procrastination audit. And it's just about discussing being an ITP, discussing MBTI, discussing anxiety, whatever it is. Feel free to do that. But that was it for this video. I appreciate you listening, and I'll see you in the next one.